Dr. Amish Adalji right now, and he's an infectious disease expert, senior scholar at Johns Hopkins Center for Health Security. As always, Doctor, thanks for coming on the show. I want to ask you actually in a moment about this new COVID variant that's been in the news and what, if anything, we need to know about that. But any reaction to these documents that Joe is reporting on? You know, this has been a debate for some time, but now the State Department says, all right, this looks like could have been leaked out of a lab and there was some sort of a cover-up from China.
Well, I think it's hard to know exactly what to think about these until we actually see the content. Yep. What we know is that this is still a live hypothesis, that there are two active hypotheses, one, the lab leak hypothesis, one, the animal spillover hypothesis, and there's some evidence for both. A lot of the evidence does center on the animal hypothesis because we haven't any evidence that the Wuhan Institute of Virology was working with a precursor to SARS-CoV-2 or with SARS-CoV-2. So what we need is a lot more transparency from the Chinese government about what viruses were present at the institute and what types of experiments were being done and at what levels of biosafety. Absent that, I don't think we're going to find out anything dispositive. It's going to still be a little bit in the air until the Chinese government decides.
It's been so politicized, right? I'd say one more thing about it. I'll put up a headline from the Associated Press about how the search for the origins of COVID-19 turned politically poisonous. At the bottom it says, unlike in the U.S., there's virtually no public debate in China about whether the virus came from nature or from a lab leak. We know the differences between our two countries. But the larger point about this issue, you think some people on both sides, to the extent politically at least, kind of dug in a little bit too much early on all this, didn't follow the facts? I know you followed the facts on COVID throughout.
I definitely think that's the case. When President Trump started calling it the China virus,
right,
and then he conflated a lab leak with a bioterrorism or a biological weapon, that conflation got people really up in arms. And what ended up happening is then people started drawing lines. Either you have this Trump hypothesis or you have this animal hypothesis, when we needed to actually be very active-minded about it and pursue both of these. And I think that's what happened, is this became a Republican theory and a Democrat theory. And just like everything else with COVID, or even in our lives in general, there's a Republican version of it and a Democrat version of it.
Yeah, it's weird, right? And I think you're right to say it's the people who don't like Trump who are just unwilling to listen to other things for political reasons. But you know, it's been a strange few years, to put it mildly. I wanted to, before we let you go, to ask you a medical question about the new COVID variants. We haven't talked for some time about new variants coming out, what they could mean, but this headline you'll see says these new variants could mean a summer surge. That's not the type of summer surge we've had in the past, right? Or what should we know?
Well, what we know is that this virus is going to continue to mutate, is going to continue to spin off new variants, basically in perpetuity. That's what viruses do. These variants are likely to be able to infect some individuals who might have had some waning of their immunity because it's been time since they've been infected or since their last booster. But what we don't see are these variants causing severe disease, causing hospitals to be in crisis. But yes, we always are going to deal with ups and downs and new variants. But I think when you look at the big picture, vaccines, antivirals, home tests, we've really tamed this virus and removed its ability to cause severe disease like it once could.
Yeah, I got one of the boosters. I forget how many months ago it was, and I went to my doctor to get a physical, and I told him about it. He said that's probably enough for you with these boosters. Is that right? I mean, what are you telling people in terms of what they should be doing in their own lives now? I know it depends on how old you are and everything else, but what have you been telling people recently, and has it changed?
It hasn't changed. It is based on what their risk factors are for severe disease. So if you're anybody that has a risk factor for severe COVID, you should be up to date, keeping up with all of the new versions of the vaccine. If you're low risk or average risk, like myself and presumably you probably don't need it. You're not going to benefit much from it. But if you're older, you're pregnant, obese, overweight, asthmatic, all of those types of things that we've identified as risk factors, diabetics, those are the people that we really need to make sure are staying up to speed with their vaccines.
Well, we got to this point, I think maybe you and I talked about it years ago. We used to talk about it, but it's the pandemic, that there would be some sort of a new normal at some point. It feels like maybe we're in that new normal now. We're learning how to deal with it, depending on our situations. Thank you, Doctor. As always, it's always good to talk to you. Dr. Amish Adalji there from Johns Hopkins. All right, let's bring in